The alien crowd erupted into laughter, their guttural chuckles echoing across the massive chamber. Holographic displays floated in mid-air, showing images of human medics in action, tending to wounds, stitching lacerations, and performing CPR. Their laughter wasn't just disdainful, it was venomous. "Primitive rituals," growled Chirac, a Zelkari scientist with scales shimmering under the room's artificial lights. "How can you call this medicine?" His sharp claws tapped at a hologram of a human medic performing chest compressions on a patient, pounding on a body like barbarians. Truly, humans are the galaxy's greatest jest. Another voice joined the ridicule. "And that, what do they call it? Defibrillator. Shocking a body to life. It's as if they believe in resurrection by sorcery." Karine, a tall, violet-skinned Etherian, sneered as she waved a hand to dismiss the hologram. Her laughter was joined by the room full of representatives from over a dozen alien species. The Galactic Summit of Medical Advancements had become an arena for mockery rather than collaboration. Humans had arrived late to the galactic stage, only a few decades ago, and while their technology was admired for its resilience, their medical practices were treated as relics of a bygone era. Why? Because the rest of the galaxy relied on nanobots and biosynthesizers that could regenerate cells, eliminate diseases, and prolong life indefinitely. To them, human medics, stitching wounds with thread, applying salves, and using machines with physical paddles, were nothing short of laughable. Dr. Lena Voss, the chief representative of Earth's medical delegation, stood at the podium, her jaw tight. Her dark hair was pulled back into a bun, and her hazel eyes burned with restrained fury. She had anticipated skepticism, but this was open humiliation. She adjusted her translator chip and leaned into the microphone. "Are you done?" she asked, her voice slicing through the laughter like a scalpel. The room quieted slightly, though a few chuckles lingered. Chirac leaned back in his seat, crossing his scaled arms with an arrogant smirk. "Apologies, Doctor," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Please, enlighten us with the art of slapping and shocking your dead patients." Lena's lips curled into a faint smile. "I will," she said. "But first tell me this. What happens when your vaunted nanobots fail? When your biosynthesizers encounter a body too damaged to repair? Do you call it impossible and declare the patient dead?" The question hung in the air like a blade. A few aliens shifted uncomfortably, but Chirac scoffed. "That's a hypothetical. Our technology doesn't fail." "Doesn't it?" Lena countered. She stepped closer to the holographic console, tapping it to display footage from a recent disaster, a starship collision on the edge of the Altair Nebula. The images showed chaos, bodies strewn across the wreckage, many too mutilated for even advanced alien medicine to repair. "Your medics declared over 100 casualties in this incident. They left the bodies to rot in the vacuum of space because their tools couldn't fix them." "And what would your primitive methods have achieved, Doctor?" Chirac asked with a sneer. Lena held his gaze, her voice steady and defiant. "We would have brought them back." A ripple of murmurs spread through the chamber. The phrase sounded absurd, even blasphemous to the assembly. Bringing the dead back? It wasn't just improbable, it was unthinkable. Karine leaned forward, her violet eyes narrowing. "You claim to have defeated death itself? More human arrogance." "No," Lena said, her voice like steel. "Not arrogance. Experience." Before anyone could respond, a loud chime echoed through the chamber, signaling the arrival of a new participant. The double doors at the back of the room slid open with a hiss, and 2 human medics entered, wheeling in a sealed, transparent chamber. Inside lay a lifeless figure, a Zelkari soldier, his scaled body gray and motionless. His chest bore a gaping wound, as though he'd been struck by plasma fire. The murmurs in the room turned to outright gasps. "That's impossible," Sirac hissed, rising from his seat. "That's Commander Varesh. He was killed in the Battle of Ulskarn. I saw his body myself." "And now you'll see something else," Lena said. She motioned to the medics who began preparing the chamber. Monitors lit up, displaying vitals, flatlines, confirming the soldier's death. Kareen's voice rose above the commotion. "This is madness, a staged spectacle to save your pride." Lena ignored her, stepping back as the medics began their work. One administered an injection of adrenaline, while the other prepared the defibrillator. The room erupted into chaos. "You think shocks and chemicals will revive a corpse?" Sirac shouted. "Quiet," Lena commanded. Her tone carried an authority that silenced even the loudest skeptic. All eyes were on the chamber as the defibrillator paddles made contact with the soldier's chest. The first jolt sent a visible ripple through his body, but the vitals remained flat. The second jolt followed, and then the third. "Enough of this," Kareen snapped. "You're desecrating—" A beep interrupted her. Then another, and another. The monitors showed a faint pulse, weak but unmistakable. The Zelkari soldier's chest rose with a shallow breath, his eyelids fluttering open. Gasps filled the chamber as he groaned, his voice weak but alive. Sirac staggered back, his scales paling. "No, this can't be—" Lena turned to the assembly, her expression calm but triumphant. "This is what you mocked. This is what you called barbaric." She leaned closer to the microphone, her voice cold and cutting. "And this is just the beginning." The chamber fell into stunned silence, broken only by the faint rhythmic beeping of the Zelkari soldier's vitals. Commander Varesh, who had been declared dead weeks ago, now blinked and turned his head. His voice was raspy but audible. "Where am I?" Sirac stumbled forward, his arrogance evaporated. He placed a trembling claw on the transparent chamber, his eyes wide. "Varesh, it's you. But how? You were gone." Lena stepped between Sirac and the chamber, her expression icy. "He was gone. By your standards, he was beyond saving. But humans don't give up when technology fails. We fight death with every tool we have, no matter how crude it looks to you." The assembly was now in chaos. Representatives shouted over one another, demanding explanations, accusing Lena of trickery or simply voicing their disbelief. Kareen, the Etherian delegate, slammed her hand on her console to silence the room. "This spectacle proves nothing," she declared. "What you've done is unnatural. How do we know this? Resurrection won't have consequences. What if you've created something dangerous?" Lena's lips thinned. She knew this would happen. Skeptics would demand more proof. Opponents would twist the narrative, claiming humans were tampering with forces they didn't understand. She'd prepared for this. "Dangerous?" Lena repeated, her voice rising. "You want to talk about danger? Let's talk about your medicine." She pointed at Kareen, her words like a scalpel cutting through the delegate's composure. "Your nanobots are programmed to repair cells. But what happens when they malfunction? When they mistake healthy tissue for a tumor and begin to consume the host from the inside out? Or your biosynthesizers? How many lives have they ended because they couldn't adapt to genetic anomalies?" Kareen opened her mouth to respond, but Lena pressed on. "Human medicine isn't perfect. It's messy, it's desperate, and sometimes it fails. But when it succeeds, it does the impossible. We don't abandon hope just because the odds are against us. That's what sets us apart." The murmurs in the room shifted tone. Some aliens, particularly the younger delegates, leaned forward, their expressions curious rather than hostile. They weren't laughing anymore. But Sirac wasn't ready to concede. He straightened, his claws clicking against the floor as he approached Lena. "Even if what you say is true, reviving the dead is a line no species should cross. Life and death are universal constants. You humans think you can defy nature itself? Lena squared her shoulders, meeting his gaze without flinching. We don't defy nature. We work with it. Everything we do, every shock, every injection, is a way of coaxing the body to remember how to live. If you call that defiance, then so be it. Before Sirach could retort, a weak voice interrupted. Doctor? Everyone turned toward the chamber. Varesh had pressed a clawed hand against the glass, his pale eyes locking onto Lena. Thank you. Lena's hardened expression softened, and she stepped closer to the chamber. You're welcome, Commander. Rest. You'll need time to recover. The simple exchange was a dagger in the heart of the skeptics. Here was proof, living, breathing proof, that human methods worked, no matter how crude or primitive they seemed. But the victory was short-lived. A piercing alarm blared through the chamber, and the lights dimmed to a threatening red. A robotic voice echoed across the room. Security breach detected. Unauthorized activity in Biocontainment Vault 7. She knew what that meant. The Zelkari delegate's scales rippled with panic. Vault 7? That's where we store the experimental pathogens, Lena finished grimly. Your so-called fail-safe medicine. The holographic display flickered to show the vault's interior. One of the containment units had ruptured, releasing a cloud of shimmering spores. The sight sent a wave of terror through the room. Alien delegates scrambled for exits, but the doors locked automatically as the facility went into quarantine. This is your fault, Kareen shouted, pointing a trembling finger at Lena. Your barbaric procedures disrupted the system. No, Lena snapped, her voice cutting through the panic. This happened because you rely too much on automation. Your security protocols didn't account for a simple electrical surge. And now, instead of fixing the problem, you're busy assigning blame. Sirach stepped forward, his earlier arrogance replaced with desperation. What do we do? Those pathogens are lethal to almost every species in this room. If they spread, they won't spread, Lena interrupted. She turned to her medics, her voice sharp and commanding. Seal the vents, deploy containment drones, and bring me a sterilizer. Her team sprang into action, their movements precise and coordinated. Meanwhile, Lena addressed the panicked delegates. You mock our methods, but right now they're your best chance of survival. So either sit down and let us work or get out of the way. The room quieted as the medics worked. One by one, the containment drones began to neutralize the spores, their glowing beams drawing them into vacuum canisters. Lena manually overrode the quarantine system, ensuring the pathogens couldn't escape. It was grueling work, but the human team operated with relentless determination. Finally, after what felt like hours, the alarm ceased. The red lights faded, replaced by the sterile white glow of normal operations. The delegates, who had been watching in stunned silence, broke into applause, not out of courtesy, but genuine gratitude. Lena stepped back from the console, wiping sweat from her brow. She turned to the assembly, her voice weary but firm. This is why we fight. Why we refuse to give up. It's not about ego or proving we're the best. It's about saving lives, no matter the odds. Sirach approached her slowly, his earlier hostility replaced with an almost reverent respect. Dr. Voss, he said, his voice quieter now. Perhaps we were too quick to judge. Lena met his gaze. You weren't just judging me. You were judging every human medic out there, every person who stays up all night fighting to save someone they've never met. Maybe it's time you stop mocking us and start learning from us. The room was silent for a moment. Then Kareen stepped forward, bowing her head slightly. You've shown us something extraordinary today, Doctor. Perhaps the galaxy has more to learn from humanity than we realized. Lena nodded, her expression unreadable. And perhaps humanity has more to learn from the galaxy. But for now, let's start with this. Hope doesn't belong to any one species. It's universal. As the delegates dispersed, humbled and thoughtful, Lena allowed herself a small smile. Humanity had earned its place in the galaxy today, not through technology, but through heart. And for the first time, the laughter had stopped.